Welcome to another Watch and Learn. I'm Johnny Barfus.
I'm Kim Sandberg.
We are educators here at Handi Quilter in the Handi Quilter Studios. Today we're talking wonky quilts, right? Quilts that won't lay flat. Now, these aren't designed wonky because that's a different thing, right? These are quilts that won't lay flat.
Right.
And this is something we get a lot of questions about, right?
As a matter of fact, I have a letter.
You have a letter? Oh my gosh.
This is another one of our quilting conundrums.
That's right.
So this is a letter, an email we received. It says, Dear Handi Quilter Studio Educators, I inherited some old quilt tops from my great-grandmother. I want to quilt them to finish them so they can be enjoyed, but they are super, all in caps, super wonky, AKA borders are put on incorrectly, etc. Can you help me? Sincerely, Willa Wonky Quilter. So we're going to answer this question today,
We
right?
are, yes. And the reason we're answering this, we get this a lot, right?
Yep,
we get this question a lot. I have wavy borders.
Yeah.
What do I do?
How do I troubleshoot this quilt?
I see this asked online as well. We see it on Facebook and stuff. So, all right, where do we get started?
Well, first of all, let's take a look at a quilt top that we have hanging here. Johnny and I feel like this is pretty...
This is a good example.
This is a very good example of the type of things that tend to come out of grandmother's attic.
A wonky quilt. This one came from Brenda, who purchased off eBay, I'm sure.
I'm sure.
And if you look, there's like lots of fullness here in this middle.
Yes.
Probably from being folded.
Yeah, and there's not even like an 8-pointed star there. There's just a nice little, just the way that it has stretched a little.
Yeah.
There's also super wavy borders over here at the edge. Can you see?
She said to pull them up a little bit so they would.
You can see how, look at this, these borders, they wave all by themselves. All I have to do is give them a little bit of flutter action there.
A lot of wave there.
A lot of wave. Look at all that wave. I mean, I can put my hands on that and try as hard as I can, but it is not laying flat. Like, it's super stretched out.
Yeah.
So, and if we step back and kind of look at this whole thing, it is not symmetrical in any way, shape, or form.
Right.
Which is totally fine. I love quilts like that. I actually think this is quite a fun, quirky quilt.
It's super fun and super quirky.
Super fun, super quirky, but it's going to definitely give us some challenges when we get it to the frame. So, where do we start?
Okay.
So the first thing you always want to do before you load a quilt top like this is take a minute to measure it.
Okay.
So let me show you how I do it so that I can figure out where things need to be. And I want to emphasize, this is the way that I do it. It doesn't mean it's the right way or the only way, but I have found success.
This is the gospel according to Kim.
Yes, exactly. So
the views expressed on this program do not represent Handi Quilter, its owners. Remember they say that on the radio all the time?
Yes,
okay.
Yes, I remember. So we're going to measure this quilt top across the top, from the top edge to the top edge over there, and then we're going to measure again in the middle, and we're going to measure again at the bottom, and we're going to take those 3 measurements, and whichever one is the smallest measurement, that's what size we want to try to keep the quilt.
The smallest.
The smallest. Because you don't want to stretch. So we'll kind of do along here. So how long are we here, Johnny?
This is 60.5.
60.5. Okay.
Okay,
so
that's our first measurement.
60.5. That's my top. And then let's do the middle.
So about right there.
Yeah, right there. That looks good.
Oh. We're about 60 1/4.
Wow.
I'm not pulling too.
No, that's fine. So 60.25. Okay.
Okay.
So that's the middle. And then the bottom, let's measure down here at the bottom.
I'm going to disappear from the camera for a minute.
We'll
But Oh.
So what is it at the bottom, Johnny?
This is 62.
Okay, 62. So we've got definitely some extra fullness at the bottom. 62. Okay. So when we load this quilt, the important thing is to figure out what that width is going to be and keep it the same consistently all the way down.
Okay.
So Johnny, anytime we load a quilt, what's the first thing we do? We load our backing, we load the quilt top on there, we put our batting down, and then what's the first thing we do?
We do a plumb line.
Exactly.
Plumb line.
Exactly. So we'll do that plumb line across the top, and then we find the center of the quilt.
Okay.
And how do we find the center of a quilt?
You just fold it.
You just fold it in half.
It's so easy.
Mark it with a pin. Super easy to do. So we can kind of lay this down up here and we'll kind of show you. So we'll figure out where that center is, and then Johnny's got some pins right there behind him.
I brought pins over there for a reason.
Yep. And we'll mark where that center is.
Okay.
And then what we'll do is we'll line it up with the center of the quilt backing and the plumb line that we have there. And then we will measure out on each side the same amount. So my smallest measurement was actually 60.25.
Right.
So we'll divide that in half, which this is dangerous again.
30 and less than
30 and an eighth?
Yeah, 30 and 1/8, yep. You guys, I was a carpenter at one time. I did woodworking.
If that's wrong, Kayla will put a big thing on the screen right here correcting me, I'm sure. Oh, hey, it's 30.125.
Oh my gosh, Kayla.
Thank you, Kayla.
Kayla for the math win.
Now, can you convert that into a fraction though? I think it's an eighth because half of a quarter is an eighth, right?
Yeah, it's fine. Yeah, you're good.
So, okay. So what we'll do is we'll put that on there and we'll make sure that we use our long arm centering tape, which is right here. And it has the middle marked with 0. And we can put that right up here along the idle bar.
We can't quite see that because of the angle, but
I know, but that's okay.
Is it okay if we just rotate this really quick?
Sure.
Or is that too much?
No, we could turn that
is
a little
that
bit.
like too crazy to do?
I was just going to show here. So we're going to pull this out. We've got our centering tape here, okay? And right here is my 0 mark. So you can see that it says 0 and then it goes 1, 2, 3, 4, all the way out on both sides. So I will put this on my idle pole right up here. Just this pole right here. You can put it on with tape. And then I will line up the center of the quilt. You guys can see here that I've got my little pin right here. I'll make sure that that's lined up with the 0. Right? Am I
the
doing
0
this right,
point,
John?
yeah.
Yep. And then I will measure out on each side, and I will find that 30
and an eighth,
which is out here. And I will make sure and keep my sides there the whole time. We'll make sure and keep that where it should be as we work our way down.
Right. And now, 1 second. Really, you and Christina talked about this in another episode, right? I know that. So this is something that we sell here at Handi Quilter. It's on the Handi Quilter website, right?
Yep.
And you can just attach it to that back idle bar. One thing Christina does is she'll mark with a Sharpie. No, not a Sharpie.
Not a Sharpie.
A dry erase, sorry. That's the only thing that came to mind.
Some kind of a marker that she can just easily wipe that away when it's done, because it'll just wipe right off.
So she'll mark on either side how wide she wants to keep that quilt. That way, as she's rolling, as she's adjusting, she always has that mark, right?
Exactly, exactly.
Okay.
So we keep it exactly that size. So the important thing to do to keep your quilt exactly the same width all the way down is to always do what every time you advance, Johnny?
Always do baste.
Baste.
Trick question, you guys. Oh, man.
I know.
Yeah, so baste the sides.
Baste the sides, baste the sides. And then one thing I didn't actually show when we were measuring this. So we measured the top, the middle, and the bottom. You want to do the same thing across the sides. You do one side, the middle, and the other side, and you can actually find out if there's a little bit of extra length through the middle of it. And if there is, what you can actually do is use, for example, on this quilt, we've got these nice rows going across here. I can actually use those rows to make sure, these rows of piecing, every time I advance at the bottom of my throat space, I can just put my channel locks on, move my machine across, and make sure that that line is staying where it should be, straight across. So that I'm not ending up with a quilt that when it gets to the bottom, either the center is going to be lower or the corners will go down.
Yeah, I've seen some really spooky. When I worked at a quilt shop, we had someone bring a quilt in, and she had a twin-size quilt that she decided to adapt as a wedding gift for her grandson into a queen-size quilt.
Yeah, which is totally doable.
It's totally doable.
Add some borders, right?
I think we should point out the best way to add borders. We'll just talk about that really quickly.
Yeah.
So when you add a border, you want to make sure you measure the quilt that you're adding the border to, cut the border that size, pin on each end, pin in the center, pin in the centers of those two centers. So don't just put I used to do this.
Fabric.
Don't just cut a 4-inch piece of fabric and sew it into strips and then just start sewing, because you're gonna stretch the quilt.
Yeah.
So we had one at the quilt shop, and it got to the bottom, and it looked seriously like a rainbow. It was just this like,
It's a frowny face.
yeah, it was a big. We'll say a rainbow.
A rainbow.
That's a happier thought.
That's a happier thought.
It was a frowny face, you guys.
Yeah,
it was
a frowny face.
It was a sad quilt.
Yeah.
But anyway, so
yeah, so you can use these lines, these kind of checkpoints in the quilt to make sure that you're keeping everything nice and straight as you go. So every time, to keep things nice and square, every time we advance, we want to always baste our sides. We're keeping them lined up with that mark that we have put here with our centering tape.
Yep.
Making sure and staying right there at that 30 1/8. We would be keeping it nice and straight along there. And then we have to deal with maybe a little extra fullness on the inside.
Okay, so what do we do
Johnny,
then?
what do we do then?
What you had?
I have a couple of ideas that I wrote down here on our little letter. So to ease in that extra fullness, there's a few ways we can do this. One really great tip that I've seen, and this is actually in our handy tips, it's from Jamie Wallen.
Okay.
Use spray starch. So what you do is you get everything set up in the frame exactly the way that you want it to be. You kind of work in all that fullness, and then you completely douse it with a really heavy spray starch like this. You just soak it and then let it dry. And the spray starch will actually draw everything in a little bit. It works, doesn't it?
I haven't tried it. I should have on the last quilt, but I didn't.
You did it. I actually used some of this on one quilt that I had a little extra wave in the borders. This is especially good for borders.
Yeah.
Oh, it just pulled it in.
Like this one probably be a good candidate for that,
actually
right?
this one probably would, especially because this is a very soft, kind of a little bit of a looser weave fabric. It's the...
oh my gosh, this one, feel that one.
I know.
It's like super...
Oh my gosh, wow.
Wow.
That's,
okay, sorry.
I think it's like feed sacks. It's all woven, super soft.
Yeah.
This fabric, I would say, I'm pretty sure it came from
like
other, probably clothing that was cut up or something.
Yeah,
like
because that's like a flannel
washed.
or a
yeah, it's been washed a lot.
ticking sheet or something. Okay.
So that's the first way to ease in extra
Okay.
fullness. The next way is a really fun way of quilting. So
It is.
let's kind of show them here, Johnny.
So I like to call it soup cans,
We call
but
it soup can quilting. So
let's get rid of this one.
Yeah, maybe we can kind of set this
Okay, we're
on the
gonna.
side. So we're just gonna set this on here and kind of show you. With the and you know what? We actually need to scoot the machine down here. So let's pull this one off real quick. We'll just set it right here on the floor. Okay, so we've got our quilt top. We'll just show you here as if it's all nice and basted down and ready to go.
So let's talk really quickly about one method for when we're basting. We didn't want to stitch this because we're not ready to quilt it.
Yeah, Johnny's not quite ready to quilt this lovely treasure that he has.
Yeah, so Kayla, if you could zoom in there on the machine. Oh, we have the ruler base on. Let me take that off really quick.
Oh, that's a good idea. Yeah, you don't want your ruler base on for this method because you need to be able to put a little extra pressure on the quilt.
Right.
So, as we are working our way across here, oh wow. Okay.
So say we are right here.
Yeah.
And I have fullness going.
Oh yeah. So move it over. Just if you move, well, you can actually see some fullness here on both sides of that.
Why don't you show them how you do it?
Well, should we just baste this one down really quick?
We could baste it. We could baste it. It'll come off easily enough.
Okay. So we've got our center marked. Let's go ahead and move over to this side. Basting is easy. So first of all, I'm going to set my machine on basting mode, and that's about as far as I can move over. So I can't go quite to the corner here just because of some other stuff we have set on the frame.
We have another machine on.
That's okay.
You won't usually have that at home.
No.
Unless you're whatever.
Unless you teach or something, who knows. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and do my basting line. Now, I actually have what is essentially a plumb line right here. So I'm just going to keep my quilt top right against that. And let's go ahead and start. Oh, you know what? I can tell that my basting stitch is at 1 inch. I want to do like a 1/2 inch. Let's do
We could turn the gears off for you too.
Okay.
Just so it's easier for you.
Okay, so what I'm going to do is put pressure. You guys can see my hand here on both sides of the fabric to kind of ease in that extra fullness.
Right.
So can you guys see how I'm doing that? And I'm just going nice and slow. There's no rush here. If you want to, you could absolutely put some pins in here. A little bit of something to help you kind of get that little extra bit of fullness in there.
Yeah, that looks really good. And I was showing my niece the other day, kind of showing her how to quilt a little bit. And I was showing her how you can add pressure to one side or the other.
Yep.
So like say if I wanted to ease in this side more, as I'm doing what you're doing, you can kind of add more pressure on one side.
Exactly.
And not both sides. So.
And I'm doing a little bit of the both side thing because this has got quite a bit of extra.
It's wonkety.
A little wonkety. That's our new word. Okay, so there's my center pin. I'm gonna pull that out. I'll hand that to you, Johnny.
Oh, thanks. I'll take care of the pins today.
So we'll just keep working our way across. Ooh, okay, Johnny, I might need your both of our hands in here to get this.
You want me down over here?
Yeah, why don't you give me a little extra? It's always nice when you got a friend to quilt with, right?
I wish I had a friend to quilt more often with, to be honest.
We do some quilting in the studio, but not nearly enough, do we? Okay. So we're getting this across here. You guys can see that this is a little bit of work, but it's totally worth it because we're going to end up with a square, flat quilt. A little more pressure there.
Oh.
There we go. There we go. Okay.
Okay.
Oop, I don't want to end up with a pleat. Okay.
Unless you do.
We'll talk about that in a minute.
We'll talk about that in a second.
The goal is not to have to put any pleats or tucks in your quilt, right? I mean, that is the goal. But sometimes there's enough fullness that it's like you essentially have to take it apart and do it again. Okay, so we're over here to the side. You guys can see that we've made it across. We're ready to start coming down. I think we actually did a pretty good job there, getting that getting that extra fullness worked in there, right, Johnny?
This one is a little...
There's still a little wonkiness here, but you know, that's the trick. Okay, so you can see as we're moving down here, we've still got a little bit of fullness through here. So how do we work that in as we're quilting?
Okay, let's
talk. So Johnny,
talk.
let's show him our super high-tech way.
There you
All
go.
Right, check
Okay, these are water bottles.
Water bottles?
Or you can do soup cans. I was going to bring in my black beans, but I totally forgot.
Yeah, totally. You lay one on each side.
I don't know if we can see that on that. Oh, there we go.
Oh, yeah, there we go. Okay.
So this is a little bit close, but you can just lay on each side of the throat space.
And you can see how that's just easing it in. And the nice thing is the quilt, or the bottle on the right side, as you're kind of quilting across the quilt, it will just move with you. So you just have to kind of roll this one a little bit to keep some pressure. So you can see that if I was quilting here, it's just easing in. I mean, if I come up here next to where some of this real fullness is, look at how putting that pressure on both sides of that, it just flattens everything out.
Right.
So
that's great.
Little soup can quilting.
Yeah, I've actually put one down here too.
Oh yeah.
On the bottom.
You
can't quite see that, but
you can put one down here. If you need to, you could do 3. So you could have another one. Sometimes I'll even put one out here, and then on this back side, I will just kind of use my hand a little bit to work in that extra fullness.
Yeah, nice.
So, isn't that cool?
Yes, that is really great.
Fun, simple tip.
Yes. So let's talk pleats or a seam.
Yes.
If you need to.
If you need to.
So where Kim was, okay, so I had one, well, I don't have the quilt. I did 3, I'm doing 4 quilt tops for a person, a friend of a friend, who they found these old quilt tops in their mom's stuff as they were cleaning out after she passed away.
Absolutely.
And I don't think she was a quilter, so they think they came from their grandma, and they're maybe even their great grandma. So this is one of them behind us here. Let's talk about this one really quick.
Such a great quilt.
So it was pretty well done. I'll say that. It was pretty well made. So I didn't have to do much, like, I didn't have to play with it too much. No soup cans or anything. It was really well done. And then the one on the ground.
This one here. Okay.
Yeah. So this was another one that I did, and same thing. It was pretty flat, so we didn't have to do too much with it. And I just did both of these. I just did an overall, an edge to edge with Pro Stitcher.
Yep.
So it just gives it, because like especially the prints on both of these, this one has all the pink, so it was going to show more. Yeah. But she didn't want to do like custom quilting. No. Yeah. So I just did an all over edge, and it fit like. It's our company motto. We want to get finish more quilts, right? We don't want to get these quilts finished. Yeah. I'm having a hard time stumbling over my words on those, so sorry.
Well, I think the important thing here is talking about ways to finish this, like the type of patterns to quilt these.
Right.
With. And edge to edge is always a great idea for quilts like this. It doesn't mean that you can't do full on super custom. I mean, we've shown quite a few quilts here, vintage ones where there has been custom, like over the top. Yeah. But this edge to edge like this is actually a really good choice on a quilt that's a little wavy or not piece so flat, because it's easy to ease in that extra fullness using an edge to edge. Yeah. So yeah, I think that these are great ones. Now,
and Johnny's got I was gonna say no overstitching too. Right. Choose a pattern. Yeah. So if you're doing Pro Stitcher, make sure you choose a pattern that doesn't have any overstitching.
Or a pantograph if you're quilting from the back.
Yeah.
Something that doesn't have a lot of overstitching, meaning like you'll stitch around a circle and then you'll stitch partway around that circle again. Stuff like that, when you're easing in extra fullness, if you've got more stitching in certain areas than other, it can kind of pull things a little bit.
Right, and if you're doing that soup can trick, the first time it goes around it, it'll do one spot, but then when it goes back around it, it might not be in the same spot. So that's why you want to do no overstitching.
Yeah. And use a thread that blends.
Yes, use a thread that blends.
Another good tip.
Okay, thank you for that.
So let's set this quilt
So
over here.
I wanted to mention possibly doing now this one wouldn't be a great candidate. Well, I don't know, maybe something like this.
Let's talk about this quilt, because this is another type of quilt that comes out that's a little wonky that sometimes we have to deal with. Number one, it's got some holes in it. I don't know if you guys can see. I'm actually putting my finger over there. So there's a little bit of repair that needs to happen.
Yeah, you'd want to repair that first.
Yes.
But if you had some fullness in this border per se, so they already have a seam right there, you could just make an extra pleat or a dart,
Or just make that seam wider, essentially. Take that seam and starting here, go out a little, or even unpick it a little bit, take a little bit out of that fullness out, and then restitch it on. Right. You can absolutely, with borders especially, it's pretty easy to go in and make some adjustments and those kind of things.
The one that I did had three borders on it.
Oh my goodness.
And they were all solid, and they were newer. It was funny because they were newer fabrics. You could tell they were brighter, and they were newer fabrics they'd added on. So I actually just did a kind of a pleat like that on the machine, and it worked.
Meaning on the long arm.
On the long arm. So I got down to that spot, and I couldn't quite ease it in with my soup cans even, and so I ended up unpicking, which no one wants to do that. But I just did like a little pleat on that border, and then I brought it in here and I sewed it on a machine, just on my domestic machine. I just stitched it down right along that seam, and you can't even tell.
And so you did the stitching with your machine after it had been quilted.
Yeah, so I quilted it first, pulled off, but you couldn't even see it. My niece came over and we couldn't even find it. So. Yeah.
Especially, I can see that, especially on a solid border, because it just turns into another
blended.
Seam. So you can do that.
Fix holes. Yeah. Fix borders.
Fix borders. Press it really well. That's another thing that's really important. Sometimes if you've got a little waviness, if you just are very careful and you press it, and that means you put the iron on it and hold it in place. You don't iron. Iron means you're moving back and forth, which can actually stretch the fabric out, right?
Exactly.
Which makes the problem worse.
I'm kind of an ironer, personally.
Press it. I know. I have to make myself. So press it with steam. You can use some more of the starch. You can do all those things to kind of help pull in that extra fullness. Yeah. So that's a good one. I think, let's see, I'm looking through all my stuff here. Okay, now, Johnny, what if I get to the bottom of my quilt and I do have that big frowny, that sad face?
Oh man, I don't know. What would you do?
What do you do? Well, one of the ways to just prevent that as you're going through and stitching is, instead of when you're basting down your sides, always starting at the top of your frame and stitching towards you, you actually line everything up nice and straight, and then you stitch from the bottom up, and you can actually put your hand, like here.
Show them how to do that.
Let's pull
Just pull that machine. Don't stitch, though.
Yeah, I won't stitch. But
I mean, it's got a lot of junk over there.
What I can do is, so if I know that this seam right here is where I want the bottom, that I want to keep things straight with, what I can do is I can line that up there, and I can stitch. And I can just set my hand right here, and my hand is still putting a little pressure on that, and I can actually walk my fingers up and keep them kind of close there. And you can see that I'm actually kind of pulling on that quilt just to ease in that little bit of extra fullness. And this way, I'm easing the fullness up in the quilt instead of down in the quilt.
Instead of pulling it all down every time.
So I'm less likely to end up with that sad face at the bottom. However, the sad face at the bottom, another way to deal with it is when you get to the bottom, you get down to the bottom and you realize your corners are dipping down a little bit. You can actually essentially do a plumb line across the bottom in the batting that you can line everything up with. Line up that bottom, go ahead and do the stitching along, basting along the edge of it, and then work that fullness in.
Yeah, and I think that's why, especially here, we recommend that you don't float that quilt.
Right.
You'd want to have that attached to your border.
Yeah,
because I had
I
had a friend who just started longarming, and he sent me a picture, and he had a lot of fullness at the bottom, and I said, "Oh, did you have it pinned?" No, he didn't.
No.
So this is when you would not want to float. We call it the F word here, and I know some of you think of other words like flotation device or fruit. But we're talking about floating.
Floating quilt tops.
Yeah.
Floating quilt tops, if it works for you, awesome, go for it.
Right.
But especially when you're working with a quilt where you do need to work in a little bit of that extra fullness, having that having the control of having it attached to the leader to be able to keep everything nice and flat, it's priceless.
It is.
Be sure to do that.
Yep.
Well,
I think that's about it, right?
Do you think Willa got her answers for?
I think Willa will be super excited.
Okay, I hope so.
Definitely.
Well,
I think that's it, right?
I think that's it.
We talked about the quilt on the wall.
Yes, we did.
Vintage.
Yes, Johnny's vintage.
Okay. Thank you so much for watching. We really appreciate it. If you haven't already, be sure to like and subscribe to our YouTube channel. And as always, have fun quilting this week.